Hey guys! Tonight we're heading to the coldest permanently inhabited place on Earth, Yakutia, in Russia's forgotten corner of Siberia, where the thermometer doesn't just drop below zero, it plummets to minus 71 degrees Celsius and laughs at your Gore-Tex jacket. You're standing in a landscape so hostile that exposed skin freezes solid in under 2 minutes. Your breath turns to ice crystals before it leaves your mouth, and the locals genuinely pack open wounds with snow because there's literally nothing else available when you're 500 kilometers from the nearest hospital. This isn't a survival challenge for Instagram. This is Tuesday. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment below telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing the global bedtime squad roll in. Someone's always eating breakfast in Tokyo while someone else in Sao Paulo is winding down their evening. And here we all are, about to spend the next few hours in the coldest place humans have decided, against all reasonable judgment, to call home. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step off the plane in Yakutsk, and the cold hits you like a physical wall. Not the, oh, I should have worn a scarf cold of a normal winter. This is different. This is the kind of cold that makes you gasp, and then you immediately regret gasping because now your lungs feel like you've inhaled broken glass. The air is so dry and so frigid that moisture vanishes instantly. There's no snow gently falling here in deep winter, because it's too cold for snow. The atmosphere can't hold enough moisture. Instead, you get something called ice fog, a thick, eerie mist of suspended ice crystals that hovers over the city like a frozen ghost, refracting the weak winter sunlight into halos and pillars of light that would be beautiful if you weren't actively dying. Welcome to the Sakha Republic, known locally as Yakutia, a region roughly the size of India but home to fewer than 1 million people. Most of that million clusters in Yakutsk, the capital, leaving vast stretches of taiga forest and tundra emptier than a midnight diner on a Tuesday. This is the land of permafrost, ground that's been frozen solid for thousands of years, sometimes hundreds of meters deep. You're standing on what is essentially a massive ice cube with a thin seasonal crust of thawed earth during the brief summer. Right now, in January, there is no thaw. There is only cold and degrees of colder, and then the kind of cold that makes meteorologists double-check their instruments because surely that reading can't be right. The current temperature is minus 65 degrees Celsius. You check your phone to confirm, but your phone is already dead. Lithium-ion batteries don't work here. They freeze and stop delivering current at around minus 20 degrees Celsius. So your smartphone, that miracle of modern technology, is now an expensive rectangular brick in your pocket. The locals know this. They carry their phones inside their innermost layers, tucked against their body heat, and only pull them out for the briefest necessary moments. You watch a woman at the bus stop check her messages, her phone wrapped in a small insulated pouch, her movements economical and practiced. She types something, shoves it back inside her coat, and goes back to waiting with the infinite patience of someone who knows the bus will come when the bus feels like coming, and complaining about it will only waste body heat. Your guide, Mikhail, a stocky man whose face is almost entirely hidden behind a fur-lined hood, gestures for you to follow him. First rule, he says, his words emerging in puffs of frost. You cover everything, everything. He points to a tiny patch of your cheek that's exposed between your scarf and your goggles. That will be frostbitten in 90 seconds, maybe less. You adjust your layers and you're already wearing what you thought was excessive protection. Thermal underwear, wool layers, insulated pants, a down parka rated to minus 40 degrees Celsius, which now seems adorably optimistic, mukluks, traditional reindeer hide boots, and mittens so thick you can barely make a fist. It's not enough. It will never be enough. Mikhail drives you into the city in a vehicle that looks like it's been reinforced for a moon landing. The engine is running. It has been running, he tells you, for 3 days straight. You turn the engine off in this cold. Maybe it never starts again, he explains. Diesel turns to jelly. Oil becomes thick like honey. Metal contracts. Things break. Throughout Yakutsk, you'll notice this. Cars idling in parking lots, outside apartment buildings, near shops. The city hums with the constant drone of engines that never sleep, burning fuel around the clock because the cost of diesel is cheaper than the cost of a frozen engine block. Some people have installed heating systems that keep the engine bay warm when parked, but those require electricity, and electricity is expensive, and sometimes the power goes out when it's minus 60 degrees Celsius, and then you have bigger problems than your car not starting. The buildings in Yakutsk look like they're on stilts, and that's because they are. You can't build directly on permafrost. The heat from a building will melt the ground beneath it, causing it to sink, crack, and eventually collapse. So everything sits on concrete or metal piles driven deep into the frozen earth, creating a gap of a meter or more between the ground and the bottom of the structure. This gives the whole city an odd, precarious appearance, as if the buildings are tiptoeing nervously across the landscape. Some of the older Soviet-era blocks are visibly tilting, victims of climate change and shifting permafrost. The ground that was supposed to stay frozen forever is thawing in patches, and now these massive concrete apartment buildings lean at unsettling angles, still occupied, still housing families who've run out of better options. You pass a playground. Yes, a playground with swings and a slide, all crusted with frost and completely deserted. Children play outside when it's warmer than minus 40 degrees Celsius, Mikhail says. You do the mental math. That means there's a 25-degree range where children are expected to just play outside, in temperatures that would trigger emergency warnings in most of the world. Kids here are building snowmen and having snowball fights, dressed in so many layers they waddle like tiny Michelin men. The sun is up, technically. It's 11 a.m., and the sky has that pale, sickly glow of a flashlight dying in a drawer. In deep winter, Yakutsk gets about 4 to 5 hours of weak daylight, the sun barely dragging itself above the horizon before giving up and sliding back down. The rest is darkness or the eerie blue twilight that isn't quite either. This does things to your brain, but we'll get to that later. For now, you're just trying to understand how anyone survives here, let alone builds a city of 300,000 people. Historians still argue whether the first humans to settle this region were incredibly brave or simply had no other choice, pushed ever northward by conflicts, climate shifts, or the simple human urge to see what's over the next ridge. What we do know is that people have lived in Yakutia for at least 40,000 years, adapting and evolving strategies that modern survival experts study with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. The Saka people, also called Yakuts, arrived more recently, around the 13th or 14th century, migrating from regions farther south and bringing with them horse-breeding cultures and metalworking skills that they adapted to these impossible conditions. You're heading to a small village outside Yakutsk, a place even more remote, where the old ways are still practiced by necessity rather than nostalgia. This is where you'll learn what it really means to survive at minus 71 degrees Celsius. This is where you'll understand why, when you slice your hand open on a piece of jagged ice or frozen metal, you pack the wound with snow. Not because you want to, because there's nothing else. The road is a single lane of packed ice stretching into the white void. There are no guardrails. There is no shoulder. There is only the road and the forest pressing in on both sides, skeletal birch and larch trees stripped bare, their branches like frozen veins against the sky. Every few kilometers, you pass a small shrine or marker, memorials to people who didn't make it, cars that slid off the road, travelers who broke down and couldn't stay warm long enough for help to arrive. Mikhail doesn't point them out. He doesn't need to. Their presence is understood. The cold is absolute. It's not just the absence of heat. It feels like the presence of something else, something hungry and patient. You can feel it probing for weaknesses in your layering, searching for gaps, waiting for you to make a mistake. Your goggles fog up from your breath, and you have to keep adjusting them, creating tiny moments where your cheeks are exposed. Each time, you feel the immediate sting, the skin tightening. You're getting your first taste of frostbite. Nothing severe yet, just the warning signs, the body's alarm system screaming at you to cover up. Get inside. Stop being an idiot. But there is no inside. Not really. Not for another hour of driving. And when you arrive at the village, you'll find that inside is a relative term. The houses will be warmer than outside, yes, but warm is not the same as comfortable. Warm means minus 10 degrees Celsius instead of minus 65 degrees Celsius. Warm means you can take off one layer of gloves instead of wearing 3. This is the reality of Yakutia. This is what people mean when they say they've adapted. They haven't conquered the cold. They've simply learned to exist alongside it, to negotiate with it, to respect it as the dominant force in their lives. And when you cut yourself, when blood wells hot against frozen skin, you'll learn the oldest trick in the Yakutian survival manual. Pack it with snow, press down, let the cold do what it does best. Stop everything, freeze the blood, seal the wound in a crust of ice until you can find shelter, warmth, needle and thread, and the presence of mind to do what needs to be done. Because out here, help isn't coming. Out here, you are your own rescue team. Out here, at -71°C, you learn very quickly that survival isn't about comfort or convenience. It's about making it to the next hour, and then the hour after that. And somehow, impossibly, the locals have been doing exactly that for thousands of years. The village appears in the distance, a cluster of wooden structures sending thin streams of smoke into the frozen air. Mikhail nods toward it. "We're here," he says. "Now your education begins. Your body you're about to discover is a spectacular piece of engineering that was absolutely not designed for this." Homo sapiens evolved in East Africa, where the thermostat sits comfortably between 20°C and 35°C, and our entire biological infrastructure reflects that tropical origin story. Your skin, your circulation, your metabolic rate, all of it calibrated for a world that doesn't actively try to kill you with cold. And now you're in Yakutia, where the temperature is -67°C, and your body is frantically running through its limited playbook of responses, none of which are adequate. The science of what happens to a human body in extreme cold is both fascinating and terrifying, and you're experiencing it in real time as you step out of Mikhail's heated truck into the village. The first thing you notice is your breath. Each exhalation creates not just a cloud of vapor, but actual ice crystals that tinkle as they fall, a sound the locals call the whisper of the stars. It's beautiful until you realize what it means. The moisture in your lungs is freezing the instant it meets the outside air. Your respiratory system is now a factory producing tiny daggers of ice with every breath. Your body's core temperature is 37°C. The air temperature is 104 degrees colder than your core. This creates what scientists call a massive thermal gradient, which is a polite way of saying heat is fleeing your body like passengers abandoning a sinking ship. Your body loses heat through 4 main mechanisms: radiation, conduction, convection, and evaporation. In normal cold, say a brisk autumn day, you might lose 60% of your heat through radiation, just warmth radiating off your skin into cooler air. But at -67°C, all 4 mechanisms are working overtime, ganging up on you, and your body's only defense is vasoconstriction, shutting down blood flow to your extremities to protect your vital organs. This is why your fingers and toes go numb first. Your cardiovascular system is making battlefield triage decisions, sacrificing the periphery to save the core. Blood vessels in your hands and feet constrict, sometimes to 1% of their normal diameter, creating what's essentially a tourniquet effect. Your fingers turn white, then waxy yellow. You can't feel them anymore, which seems like it should be alarming, but you're too focused on the fact that your face hurts. A deep, aching pain as facial muscles stiffen in the cold. Mikhail watches you flex your fingers uselessly inside your mittens. "Don't take the gloves off to check," he warns. "I once saw a scientist from Moscow do that. He wanted to see if his hands were frostbitten. Took off his glove for 5 seconds to look. Lost 3 fingers. You decide your fingers are probably fine. You'll check later, much later, when you're inside and there's a fire and possibly medical personnel standing by. The village elder, Nikolai, emerges from one of the wooden houses. He's 73 years old and has lived in Yakutia his entire life. His face is a roadmap of frostbite scars, pale patches on his cheeks, a nose that's slightly flattened from repeated freezing and thawing, earlobes that look like they've been nibbled by an enthusiastic but incompetent sculptor. "You get used to it," he says in Russian, which Mikhail translates. "This is objectively a lie. You don't get used to -67°C. You just develop a higher tolerance for suffering." Nikolai invites you into his home, and the temperature differential hits you like a physical force. Inside, it's -5°C. This feels tropical by comparison. You start sweating immediately under your layers, which is dangerous. Moisture is the enemy in extreme cold. Wet clothing loses its insulating properties and can accelerate hypothermia. You need to strip down to base layers quickly, but your fingers are too numb to work zippers and buttons. Mikhail has to help you, and you feel like a toddler being undressed after playing in the snow, except the stakes here include possible death. The house is heated by a wood stove that burns continuously through winter. The walls are thick timber, chinked with moss and clay, and covered with layers of reindeer hide for extra insulation. The windows are triple-paned, and even so, frost grows on the inside of the glass in intricate fern patterns. There's no running water. Pipes would freeze and burst instantly, so water comes from melting ice harvested from the nearby river. Nikolai shows you a bucket of river ice sitting near the stove. Best water in the world, he says. Frozen for 10,000 years, then melted. Very pure. You're not sure if he's joking about the 10,000 years part. Historians still argue whether some of Yakutia's ice formations date back to the Pleistocene, but it's entirely possible you're about to drink water that was frozen when mammoths walked this region. Your body is still in crisis mode, trying to rewarm your extremities now that you're in relative warmth. This process is called reperfusion, and it hurts. A lot. Your fingers and toes transition from numb to pins and needles to outright agony as blood flow returns. You've heard of frostbite, but you're experiencing something milder called frostnip, superficial freezing of skin tissue that's painful but reversible. True frostbite occurs when ice crystals actually form inside your cells, puncturing cell membranes and causing permanent damage. At minus 67 degrees Celsius, you can progress from no damage to severe frostbite in under 5 minutes of exposure. The cellular mechanics of frostbite are brutal. When tissue freezes, water inside and between cells turns to ice. Ice crystals are sharp and expand as they form, shredding cell membranes like microscopic knives. When you rewarm, the damage continues. Blood vessels are torn, blood leaks into surrounding tissue, and inflammatory responses kick in, sometimes causing more harm than the initial freezing. Severe frostbite can require amputation, not because the tissue is frozen solid like a popsicle, but because the cellular destruction and subsequent gangrene make the tissue non-viable. Nikolai has seen plenty of frostbite cases. Before, we had a feldsher, a medical assistant, in the village, he explains. But she moved to Yakutsk 5 years ago. Now, if someone is hurt, we do what we can. He shows you the village's medical supplies. A dusty first aid kit with bandages, some expired antibiotics, vodka for disinfection. He insists, though you suspect it has other uses, needle and thread for sutures, and that's about it. No anesthetic, no proper surgical tools, no way to call for emergency help because cell service is non-existent and the nearest clinic is a 6-hour drive on dangerous roads. This is why snow becomes medicine. When someone cuts themselves, say, splitting frozen wood, and the axe glances off and bites into a thigh instead, you have seconds to make decisions. Blood in extreme cold behaves strangely. It thickens, clots faster, but also freezes on contact with air, creating a seal that's temporary at best. If the cut is deep, you need to stop the bleeding immediately, and you need to prevent infection in an environment where medical help might not arrive for hours or days. The technique is simple and desperate. Pack the wound with clean snow, press down hard, let the cold do what your body is struggling to accomplish. The snow provides 3 things. It cools the tissue, causing further vasoconstriction that slows bleeding. It acts as a physical pressure bandage, and paradoxically, it provides some insulation once it melts and refreezes, creating an ice seal over the wound. You then wrap the area in whatever clean cloth you have, keep pressure on it, and start the long process of getting to actual help. Is this medically advisable? Absolutely not. Doctors will tell you that introducing snow to an open wound risks infection from bacteria, dirt, and organic matter. They'll tell you that extreme cold on traumatized tissue can cause additional damage. They're not wrong. But doctors say these things from climate-controlled hospitals with autoclave-sterilized instruments and intravenous antibiotics standing by. Out here, the calculation is different. Bleed out in the next 10 minutes, or risk infection you might be able to fight off later. The choice makes itself. Nikolai tells you about a hunting accident 3 winters ago. A young man named Alexei shot a deer but stumbled while dressing it, driving his knife deep into his own forearm, severing what was probably the radial artery based on the description of spurting blood. His companions packed the wound with snow, wrapped it tight with strips torn from a shirt, and fashioned a tourniquet from a belt. They drove him to Yakutsk, a journey that took 8 hours because a storm had made the roads nearly impassable. Alexei survived, though he lost partial function in 2 fingers from nerve damage. But he lived, Nikolai shrugs. Snow is not hospital, but snow is what we have. The physics of extreme cold affects everything around you in ways that seem almost supernatural until you understand the science. Metal becomes brittle, steel tools can shatter like glass if struck wrong. Rubber loses all flexibility and cracks. Plastics turn fragile. You watch Nikolai demonstrate by taking a rubber hose outside and flexing it. It snaps cleanly in half with a sound like a breaking carrot. In summer, this bends, he says. In winter, everything breaks. Even air behaves differently. At minus 70 degrees Celsius, the air is so dense that sound travels differently, muffled and strange. Voices sound flat, distant. There's no echo in the forest because the cold air absorbs sound waves. The silence is oppressive, broken only by the occasional crack of a tree freezing and splitting. Yes, trees explode in extreme cold when the sap inside them freezes and expands. You'll lie awake that first night listening to the forest shatter itself. Loud reports like gunshots echoing across the frozen landscape. Your own body continues its valiant struggle against thermodynamics. Your metabolic rate has increased dramatically. You're burning calories at perhaps twice your normal rate just to maintain core temperature. You're hungry constantly, and the locals eat accordingly. Diets heavy in fat and protein, horse meat and fish, reindeer lard spread on bread, fermented mare's milk called kumis that taste sour and slightly alcoholic. These foods make sense in context. Fat provides 9 calories per gram compared to 4 for protein or carbohydrates. In extreme cold, calories are quite literally fuel for your internal furnace. There's a quirky detail that anthropologists love to point out. The Saka people have the highest percentage of lactose tolerance of any ethnic group in Siberia, a genetic adaptation that allowed them to derive nutrition from dairy in an environment where vegetables are unavailable for 8 months of the year. Your digestive system, meanwhile, is working overtime, diverting blood flow away from the gut to prioritize vital organs and muscles, which is why eating in extreme cold can sometimes cause stomach cramps. Your body is trying to decide what's more important, digesting that horse meat or keeping your heart pumping. Usually it chooses heart. You step outside again briefly to use the outhouse, yes, an actual outhouse, because indoor plumbing is a fantasy here, and you're reminded that certain biological functions become complicated at minus 67 degrees Celsius. Urination requires carefully calculated layering removal and even more careful aiming, because urine freezes before it hits the ground, creating what the locals call pissicles. And yes, you can absolutely get frostbite on parts of your anatomy you really don't want frostbitten. The outhouse itself is an experience. A wooden shack with a hole cut in a bench, beneath which your deposits freeze instantly into a pyramid of waste that won't decompose until spring thaw. It's horrifying and weirdly sanitary at the same time. No smell, no flies, no bacterial growth. Just a monument to months of bathroom visits, frozen in time. Back inside, Nikolai's wife, Olga, serves tea so hot you can barely hold the cup. You cup your hands around it gratefully, and she smiles. She's lost 3 teeth to the cold. Apparently she went outside to hang laundry years ago, forgot to close her mouth, and her saliva froze instantly, cracking 3 teeth. Now I remember, she says cheerfully, pointing to the gaps in her smile. You make a mental note. Breathe through your nose, keep your mouth shut. Don't become a cautionary tale about dental hygiene in extreme climates. The evening darkens early. It's only 3 p.m., but the sun has already given up and slipped below the horizon. The temperature outside is dropping further, heading toward minus 70 degrees Celsius overnight. This is when the real cold arrives, when the Earth radiates away what little heat it absorbed during the brief daylight hours. This is when people die if they're caught outside, when vehicles refuse to start even if they've been running, when the ice fog thickens until you can't see your hand in front of your face. You settle in near the stove, wrapped in reindeer hides, and Nikolai begins to tell you stories of winter survival, of the old ways his grandmother taught him, of the time he fell through ice and had to walk 3 kilometers home with frozen clothes turning into armor around him. But those stories are for later. Right now, you're just beginning to understand the fundamental truth of Yakutia. Your body is a tropical machine running in an Arctic hell, and every moment you survive here is a testament to human stubbornness, ingenuity, and a willingness to pack wounds with snow because the alternative is worse. The reality of snow as medicine hits you on your third day in the village, when a teenage boy named Sasha stumbles into Nikolai's house with blood streaming down his arm, his face pale as the landscape outside. He'd been chopping ice from the river for drinking water, thick, ancient ice that requires an axe and considerable force to break, when the blade glanced off at an angle and bit deep into his forearm. The wound is maybe 4 inches long, gaping open, and you can see fat tissue and muscle beneath the skin. In a normal place, this would mean an immediate trip to the emergency room, possibly surgery, definitely stitches. Here, it means Nikolai's kitchen table and a tutorial in frontier medicine you never wanted. Mikhail is already moving, his actions practiced and calm. Get clean snow, he tells you. From the top layer, away from the house, where no one has walked. You grab a metal bowl and step outside, where the temperature has dropped to minus 69 degrees Celsius overnight. The cold slaps you hard enough that you gasp, immediately regretting it as your lungs seize. You scoop snow from a pristine drift, trying to work quickly because your hands are already going numb despite the gloves. The snow is different here than snow you might know from milder climates. It's dry, crystalline, almost squeaky when you compress it. No moisture content to speak of, just frozen air essentially. Back inside, Sasha is sitting at the table, breathing in short, sharp gasps. Olga is cutting away his blood-soaked sleeve with scissors, talking to him in a steady, soothing voice. The boy is 14, maybe 15, and trying very hard not to cry. The wound is worse than you thought. Deeper at one end, bleeding steadily but not spurting, which means the axe missed the major artery by maybe half a centimeter. Lucky. In this place, with these resources, he's incredibly lucky. Nikolai examines the wound with the practiced eye of someone who's done this before. Not too deep, he announces, though you're pretty sure it's very deep by any reasonable medical standard. We can handle this. He gestures for the bowl of snow, and you hand it over, watching as he packs a handful directly into the open wound. Sasha hisses in pain, his whole body going rigid, but Nikolai keeps packing, filling the gash with snow and pressing down firmly. The cold stops the bleeding, he explains to you in Russian, Mikhail translating. Makes the blood vessels close up tight. Gives us time to work. The science here is brutal but sound. Extreme cold causes vasoconstriction, the blood vessels constrict, reducing blood flow to the area. The snow also helps with hemostasis, the body's natural clotting process, by slowing down blood flow enough that platelets can do their job. You're essentially inducing localized hypothermia in the tissue, which sounds terrible until you remember that controlled hypothermia is actually used in modern surgery for exactly this reason. Cardiac surgeons cool patients' bodies to slow metabolism and reduce oxygen demand during complex procedures. Sasha's wound is getting the same treatment, just with snow instead of a sophisticated medical cooling system. Mikhail pulls out a bottle of vodka. Not the good stuff, he notes, which would be wasteful, but the cheap rotgut that's about 40% alcohol. He pours it over his hands, over Nikolai's hands, over the needle and thread that Olga has produced from somewhere. The thread is actual thread, not surgical suture, probably meant for repairing clothes. The needle is a regular sewing needle, maybe a bit thicker than average. This is what passes for a sterile field in a village with no medical facilities. Vodka, boiled water, and hope. After 5 minutes of snowpack, the bleeding has slowed to a weep. Nikolai removes most of the snow, leaving some packed in the deeper part of the wound, and begins to irrigate it with boiled water that's been cooling to a temperature that won't cause additional tissue damage. You can see small ice crystals in the wound edges. The tissue has partially frozen. This is good, Nikolai says, noticing your expression. Frozen tissue, no infection. We clean, we sew, it heals. He says this with the confidence of someone who's seen it work, though you suspect he's also seen it not work, seen infections set in, seen people lose limbs or worse. Historians still argue whether traditional Siberian peoples understood germ theory before Western medicine arrived, or if they simply noticed empirically that cold seemed to keep wounds cleaner. What we do know is that the Saka and other northern groups had sophisticated wound care practices that involved ice, snow, and certain plants with antimicrobial properties when available. They couldn't articulate why these methods worked in terms of bacteria and cellular biology, but they didn't need to. Empirical observation over hundreds of years had taught them what worked and what didn't. The suturing process is hard to watch. Sasha bites down on a leather strap as Nikolai threads the needle through his skin, pulling the edges of the wound together. There's no anesthetic. There's no numbing agent. There's just the residual cold from the snowpack, which has frozen the superficial nerve endings enough to dull the worst of it, and Sasha's own willpower. He's crying now, silent tears running down his face, but he's not pulling away. Olga holds his other hand, squeezing it, murmuring encouragements. The stitches are crude, uneven spacing, one side higher than the other in places, but they're holding the wound closed, which is the point. 15 stitches later, Nikolai ties off the thread and sits back. Now we watch, he says. 3 days we check for infection. If red, if hot, if smell bad, we have problem. He doesn't elaborate on what problem means in a place where antibiotics are expired and hospitals are hours away. You can imagine. Reopening the wound, draining infection, possibly amputation if gangrene sets in. These are the calculations of frontier medicine, the brutal arithmetic of limited resources. The wound is wrapped in clean cloth boiled earlier that morning, and Sasha is given tea with honey and told to rest. He'll stay here for a few days so Nikolai can monitor the wound. His mother arrives an hour later from another house in the village, her face tight with worry, but when she sees Sasha sitting up, drinking tea, she relaxes visibly. She thanks Nikolai in a flood of rapid Saka that you don't understand, but gratitude is universal. You ask Mikhail about other injuries he's seen treated this way. The list is longer and more varied than you expected. Lacerations from tools, puncture wounds from falls onto ice, one memorable case of a man who'd been gored by a reindeer. Apparently they're not as docile as they look, and had a 3-inch hole in his thigh. All packed with snow first, Mikhail says. Then clean, then close if we can, or let it heal open if we can't. You do what you can with what you have. There's a darker category of injuries that snow can't help with. Severe trauma, internal bleeding, compound fractures. For those, the only option is transport to Yakutsk, and whether you survive depends on how fast you can make that journey and how much blood you've lost by the time you arrive. Mikhail tells you about a logging accident 5 years ago where a man was crushed when a frozen tree fell wrong. We knew he was dying, Mikhail says quietly. Too much damage inside, but we tried. Drove him for 4 hours before he stopped breathing. His wife was in the truck holding him. Sometimes there is nothing you can do. The use of snow for wound care extends beyond just stopping bleeding. In a place where water must be melted from ice and carefully rationed, snow provides a ready source of relative cleanliness for irrigation. Yes, snow contains microorganisms and trace contaminants, but fresh powder snow from the top layer is remarkably clean. Cleaner than soil, cleaner than untreated water from many sources, and certainly cleaner than nothing. Modern medical professionals would be horrified, but modern medical professionals aren't making decisions at -70 degrees Celsius in a village without electricity or running water. There's also the psychological component, the doing something, anything, when someone is injured and frightened. Packing a wound with snow is an action, a treatment, a way of saying we're handling this, even when you're not entirely sure you're handling it. This matters in survival situations. Panic kills. Helplessness kills. Giving people tasks, giving them the sense that they're fighting back against injury and cold and death, can be the difference between someone holding on until help arrives and someone giving up. You spend the rest of that day helping around the house, watching Sasha for signs of shock or deterioration. His color improves after a few hours, and by evening he's complaining about being hungry, which Olga takes as a good sign. She feeds him fatty soup, rich with reindeer marrow, and he slurps it down while you try not to think too hard about what you'll do if you injure yourself out here. You've got your own small first aid kit from Moscow, band-aids and antibiotic ointment and pain relievers, and it seems laughably inadequate now. If something goes wrong, you'll be at the mercy of the same rough treatment Sasha received, except you don't have his lifetime of tolerance for hardship. That night, Nikolai shows you something interesting. A collection of plants and fungi preserved in jars, collected during the brief summer months when Yakutia explodes into frantic life. There's chaga mushroom, which grows on birch trees and is used for tea that supposedly has immune-boosting properties. There's yarrow, a plant with documented antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory compounds. There's something he calls bear's root that you can't identify but that he swears reduces infection risk when made into a poultice. Whether these have actual medicinal value or are purely placebo is hard to say. Some plant remedies have proven pharmacological effects, while others are folklore with no biological mechanism. But in a place where you can't exactly conduct double-blind clinical trials, you use what seems to work. One quirky detail that surprises you. The Saka people traditionally used spider webs packed into wounds to promote clotting. Spider silk contains proteins that can help with hemostasis and may even have mild antimicrobial properties. This practice shows up independently in various cultures worldwide, suggesting it has some empirical basis. Of course, finding spider webs in -70 degrees Celsius is impossible. Spiders very sensibly die or hibernate, so it's a summer treatment only. Winter means snow. Always snow. The next morning, you check on Sasha. Nikolai unwraps the bandage carefully, and you all lean in to examine the wound. The edges are slightly swollen, which is normal inflammatory response, but there's no spreading redness, no streaks going up the arm, no obvious pus. The stitches are holding. The wound is closed. It looks, against all odds, like it might actually heal without major complications. Sasha grins, relieved, and flexes his fingers to show the hand still works. "You see," Nikolai says to you, gesturing at the wound. "Snow medicine. Not perfect, but it works. My grandfather's grandfather used snow. My grandfather used snow. I use snow. Maybe my grandson will have hospital, maybe not. But snow is always here." You realize he's describing a medical tradition spanning generations, passed down through observation and necessity. No medical schools, no journals, no peer review. Just the accumulated wisdom of people who had to figure out how to keep each other alive in the most unforgiving environment humans inhabit. Some of what they learned was probably wrong, discarded after painful trial and error. But some of it works well enough that people are still here, still surviving, still packing wounds with snow when there's nothing else to pack them with. The phrase, "when there's nothing else," echoes in your mind. That's the key qualifier. Snow as medicine isn't preferred. It's not optimal. It's what you reach for when the alternative is watching someone bleed out on a kitchen table while the nearest surgeon is 6 hours away through a blizzard. It's desperation medicine, last resort medicine, but it's also medicine that has kept people alive in Yakutia for longer than most of us can imagine. You step outside into the mid-morning darkness. The sun will make its brief appearance in a few hours, and the cold hits you with its usual aggressive enthusiasm. Somewhere out there in the taiga, someone might be injured right now, falling through ice or cutting themselves on frozen metal or suffering any of the 100 small disasters that become major emergencies in this climate. And if they're lucky, someone nearby will know what to do, will pack the wound with snow, will do what can be done until real help arrives. If they're lucky, morning in Yakutia doesn't announce itself with sunrise so much as a grudging lightening of the darkness from black to charcoal gray to a pale, sickly blue that passes for daylight in deep winter. You wake at what your watch claims is 9 a.m., though your body insists it's still the middle of the night. The house is cold. The wood stove has burned down to coals overnight, and the interior temperature has dropped to maybe -15 degrees Celsius. Your breath fogs in the air above your face as you lie there under a pile of reindeer hides and wool blankets, trying to convince yourself to leave this cocoon of relative warmth. Nikolai is already up, has been up for an hour, coaxing the stove back to life. You can hear him moving around in the main room, the clunk of wood being fed into the firebox, the creak of the cast iron door. Getting out of bed at -15 degrees Celsius requires a strategy. You can't just throw off the covers and dash to your clothes. Well, you could, but you'd regret it as the cold slammed into your body like a physical assault. Instead, you do what the locals do. You get dressed under the blankets, a contortionist act of wriggling into long underwear, wool pants, and thick socks without exposing any significant body surface to the air. By the time you emerge from the sleeping area, You're already wearing 4 layers on your torso and 3 on your legs. Nikolai glances at you and grunts approval. Good. You learn. He hands you a cup of tea so hot it nearly scalds your hands through the cup, and you cradle it gratefully, using it to rewarm fingers that went numb during the dressing process. Breakfast is reindeer fat spread on dark bread, a slab of frozen fish that Olga shaves thin slices from with a knife, and more tea. The fat is exactly what it sounds like. Actual chunks of white adipose tissue rendered down and stored in jars. Tastes like fat, greasy, slightly gamey, and absolutely packed with calories. You spread it thick on the bread because Mikhail told you yesterday that you need to consume at least 5,000 calories a day just to maintain your weight in this cold, and you've already lost a noticeable amount since arriving. Your body is burning through resources like a furnace set to maximum, trying desperately to maintain core temperature against the impossible cold outside. The morning chores begin as soon as breakfast ends, and this is where you truly understand what daily survival means in Yakutia. First task: deal with the water situation. The bucket of river ice has melted overnight next to the stove, providing maybe 4 liters of water for the entire household. This must cover drinking, cooking, and minimal washing. Bathing is a luxury scheduled for once a week, and even then it's more of a strategic wipe down than anything resembling a shower. You're already discovering that your own body odor has become quite pronounced. You smell like someone who hasn't properly bathed in days because you haven't. Everyone smells. Nobody cares. Personal hygiene takes a backseat to survival when water is a limited resource that must be laboriously harvested and melted. Nikolai hands you an ice axe and gestures toward the door. We get more ice. You help. You layer up, exterior parka, face mask that covers everything but your eyes, goggles over those, hood up, drawstrings pulled tight. The transformation from human to shapeless bundle of fabric and fur takes 5 minutes. Nikolai watches patiently, then adds one more piece of equipment. A length of rope that he ties around your waist and then to his own. In ice fog, you can't see 1 meter ahead, he explains. People get lost between house and shed, wander into forest, freeze. Rope keeps us together. Outside, the cold is a living thing that immediately begins probing for weaknesses. The inside of your nose freezes instantly, the small hairs becoming brittle ice needles. Your goggles start to fog from your breath, and you have to keep adjusting them to prevent complete vision loss. The village is barely visible through the ice fog, a thick, eerie mist of suspended ice crystals that refracts the weak light into strange halos and pillars. You can see maybe 3 meters ahead, which makes the walk to the river genuinely dangerous. You follow Nikolai, connected by the rope, shuffling carefully over ground that's slick with compressed ice. The river is frozen solid to a depth of over 2 meters. In the brief summer, this same river flows fast and deep, full of fish and relatively warm. Now it's a highway of ice, and the locals have cut a series of holes that they maintain throughout winter for ice harvesting. Nikolai shows you how to identify good ice. Clear, dense, old ice that's been frozen for years and is relatively free of sediment. New ice, surface ice, has bubbles, has dirt, he says. Old ice is clean, tastes better. You watch as he swings the axe, chipping away at the ice around the harvest hole. Each swing requires significant force. This ice is hard as concrete. Your turn comes, and you quickly discover that swinging an axe while wearing 3 layers of gloves and a heavy parka is exhausting. You manage maybe 5 swings before you're breathing hard, your goggles fogging catastrophically. Nikolai takes over, and between the two of you, you manage to extract several large blocks of ice over the next 20 minutes. The return trip to the house is harder. You're carrying 30 kilograms of ice in a sack, and every breath is now a labored gasp that produces ice crystals that hang in the air behind you like a trail. Your thighs are burning with effort. You're sweating under your layers, which is dangerous. Remember, moisture is the enemy. Nikolai notices you struggling and takes some of your load without comment. This is what community means in Yakutia. Everyone helps because everyone will eventually need help, and pride is a luxury you can't afford when the alternative is freezing to death. Back inside, you strip off the outer layers quickly. Your base layer is indeed damp with sweat, and you change it immediately, hanging the wet garment near the stove to dry. Nikolai does the same. This is part of the daily routine. changing base layers, drying them, rotating through your limited wardrobe to ensure you always have something dry against your skin. Wet clothing can kill you here faster than exposure alone. Next chore, checking the reindeer. Nikolai keeps 4 of them in a small shelter attached to the house. Not quite inside, but protected from the worst of the wind. Reindeer are remarkably cold-adapted animals. Their fur is so insulating that snow doesn't melt when it falls on them, and their metabolisms can handle the extreme cold far better than humans. But they still need care. You follow Nikolai to the shelter, where the temperature is maybe minus 30 degrees Celsius, positively tropical compared to outside. The reindeer regard you with those ancient, impassive eyes that herbivores have perfected over millennia. They're smaller than you expected, but stocky and covered in thick fur that you can't resist touching. It's incredibly dense, with a coarse outer layer and a soft, insulating underlayer. In old times, people made clothes from reindeer intestines. Nikolai tells you, waterproof, windproof, better than any modern jacket. This is not an exaggeration. Traditional saka clothing made from reindeer intestines was remarkably effective, creating a weatherproof outer layer while allowing moisture vapor to escape. Modern outdoor companies would kill for that kind of performance. The reindeer need to be fed, lichen that was harvested during summer and stored in sacks. They also need their water, which means more melted ice. You watch as Nikolai checks each animal's hooves for ice buildup and signs of frostbite, running practiced hands over their legs and bodies, looking for injuries or illness. A sick reindeer in winter usually dies, he says matter-of-factly. Sometimes we can help, sometimes no. We watch them closely. The morning is half gone, and you've already completed what feels like a full day's work. But there are more chores. The outhouse needs to be checked. The wooden structure can crack and fail in extreme cold, and you really don't want to discover a structural failure during an emergency bathroom trip at 2 a.m. The firewood supply needs to be replenished, which means splitting logs outside. The stove's ash needs to be cleared and disposed of. Food supplies need to be inventoried and rotated. Frozen meat stored in an exterior cache. Dried goods kept inside where it's warmer. The firewood splitting is its own adventure. The logs are frozen solid, and the axe, metal of course, is cold enough that touching it with bare skin would instantly freeze you to it. Nikolai demonstrates the proper technique. Quick, powerful strokes, letting the momentum of the axe do the work, never gripping the handle in a way that risks bare skin contact if your gloves slip. The wood splits with sounds like gunshots, the frozen fibers shattering rather than separating. You try it yourself and manage to wedge the axe into a log without actually splitting it, requiring several embarrassing minutes of wiggling and prying to extract the blade. It takes practice, Nikolai says, which is generous given that you basically just failed at one of the most fundamental survival tasks. He shows you again, and this time you watch more carefully. The angle of approach, the slight twist at the end of the swing, the way he reads the grain of the wood. Your next attempt is better. The log splits cleanly, and you feel a ridiculous surge of pride. By early afternoon, though the sky is already darkening again, you've completed the basic daily chores, and you're exhausted. Nikolai seems barely winded. Olga has prepared lunch. Boiled potatoes, more fish, a soup made from horse bones that's been simmering on the stove all morning. The soup is rich and fatty and exactly what your body is craving. You eat 2 bowls, mopping up the last drops with bread, and realize you're already hungry again. The afternoon brings what Nikolai calls maintenance tasks. Repairing a tear in one of his fur garments, checking the house for new cracks or gaps in the insulation where cold might be seeping in, sharpening tools. You help where you can, but mostly you watch and learn. There's a rhythm to life here, a constant cycle of preparation and maintenance and repair. Nothing can be postponed or ignored because small problems become life-threatening problems very quickly at minus 70 degrees Celsius. One task fascinates you particularly: maintaining the frost seal around the windows. The triple pane glass is good, but not perfect. Cold seeps in around the frames, and Nikolai combats this by deliberately creating a frost barrier. He sprays water around the window edges, where it instantly freezes, creating an ice seal that actually improves insulation. Ice stops air, he explains. Stops cold air coming in, warm air going out. is brilliantly counterintuitive, using ice to insulate against cold. But it works. Historians still argue whether this technique originated with the Saka or was borrowed from other Arctic peoples. But it shows up in various forms across northern Siberia and even in parts of Scandinavia. The principle is sound. Ice is actually a decent insulator when it's dense and thick enough, certainly better than air gaps. Modern Arctic engineering has rediscovered many of these traditional techniques, often with embarrassment at having overlooked indigenous knowledge for so long. As evening approaches, which really just means the gray light fades back to black, you understand viscerally what daily life means here. It's not about leisure or convenience or comfort. It's about an endless series of tasks that must be completed to survive another day. Harvest ice, melt ice, feed the stove, split wood, check the animals, repair clothing, monitor food supplies, check for frostbite, change wet layers. Every single task is critical, and skipping any of them can create cascading failures that end in disaster. You think about modern life, about thermostats you can adjust with your phone, about turning on a tap and getting hot water instantly, about grocery stores where food appears as if by magic, about central heating that requires no thought or effort. That life seems not just distant but almost fictional from here, like something you read about in a book once. Here, survival is tangible, immediate, and exhausting. Dinner is similar to lunch, fatty, protein-heavy, calorie-dense. You're eating constantly and still losing weight. Your body is a furnace that can't be satisfied. After dinner, there's a brief period of relative relaxation. Nikolai produces a battered accordion and plays traditional Saka songs, while Olga does some sewing by the light of a kerosene lamp. The electricity in the village is sporadic at best, generated by a diesel generator that runs for a few hours each evening if fuel is available and the generator feels like cooperating at minus 70 degrees Celsius, which it often doesn't. You ask about modern conveniences, internet, television, communication with the outside world. Nikolai shrugs. In Yakutsk, yes, they have everything. Here, we have radio sometimes. Phone if we drive to where there is signal. Mostly, we have each other. He says this without sentimentality, just stating a fact. The village is its own world, largely disconnected from the digital age that's transformed most of the planet. Before bed, there's one more task, the evening check. This means stepping outside one final time to verify the reindeer are secure. The firewood is covered. Nothing has blown loose in the wind. No cracks have developed in walls or roofs. You volunteer to help, and Nikolai accepts with a nod. Outside, the temperature has dropped to minus 72 degrees Celsius, the coldest you've experienced yet. The cold is so intense it's almost abstract, beyond pain, just a massive presence that wants you dead. You complete the check-in under 5 minutes, moving quickly, and when you get back inside, your entire body is shaking uncontrollably. Nikolai hands you tea and watches as you thaw out. You did well today, he says. Worked hard, learned fast. Maybe you could live here. He's joking, but there's a hint of genuine appraisal in his voice. You've proven you're not completely useless. That night, buried under your reindeer hides, you drift off to the sound of the stove crackling and the forest cracking in the cold outside. Your muscles ache. Your face still stings from frost exposure. Your hands are raw from work. But you're warm, you're fed, and you're alive. Tomorrow you'll wake up and do it all again. The ice, the wood, the animals, the endless maintenance. Because that's what survival means in Yakutia. Not grand adventures or dramatic moments, but daily routines performed with competence and care, over and over, until spring arrives and you can finally, briefly, relax. Assuming you make it to spring. On your 5th day in the village, Nikolai announces that you're going to meet the eldest person in the community. A woman named Sardana who is 91 years old and has lived through more Yakutian winters than you can wrap your mind around. She remembers the old ways, Nikolai says with reverence. Before Soviet times, before tractors, before anything modern. She can tell you how people really survived. You bundle up in your now familiar layers and follow Nikolai through the ice fog to a house at the far edge of the village, smoke curling from its chimney into the frozen air. Sardana's home is smaller than Nikolai's but arranged with the same practical efficiency. Stove in the center, sleeping platforms along the walls, storage for food and tools in every available space. The old woman herself is tiny, maybe 4.5 feet tall. Her face a landscape of wrinkles that map out 9 decades of smiling, squinting against blinding snow, and enduring cold that would kill most humans. Her hands are gnarled from a lifetime of work, but her eyes are sharp and assessing as she looks you over. She says something in Saka, and Nikolai translates. She says you look soft, like city people, but your eyes are curious. That's good. Curious people learn. You settle onto a low stool near the stove while Sardana prepares tea with movements so practiced they're almost ritualistic. The tea itself is interesting. She's using chaga mushroom harvested from birch trees, creating a dark, slightly bitter brew that's been drunk in this region for thousands of years. Good for health, she says in Russian that's heavily accented but clear enough. Keeps you strong in winter. Whether chaga has genuine medicinal properties is still debated. Some studies suggest antioxidant and immune-supporting compounds. Others find little evidence beyond placebo, but Sardana has been drinking it for 91 years and seems to be doing fine. She begins to talk, and Nikolai translates when she switches to Saka, which happens frequently when she's describing traditional concepts that don't translate well to Russian. The Saka people, she explains, arrived in this region around the 13th or 14th century, migrating north from areas around Lake Baikal, bringing with them horses and cattle and metalworking knowledge that set them apart from the indigenous peoples already living in Yakutia. We learned from the Evenks and Yukagir who were here first, Sardana says. They taught us how to hunt in deep cold, how to find food in winter, how to read the weather. We taught them about horses, about making iron tools. Everyone shared or everyone died. The Saka developed a survival culture specifically adapted to extreme cold in a way that even other Siberian peoples hadn't quite matched. At the heart of this was the horse. While most Arctic peoples relied on reindeer, the Saka brought horses and figured out how to keep them alive through winters that regularly hit -60 degrees Celsius or colder. This required innovation. Special shelters called kotan, careful management of hay supplies harvested during the frantic summer months, and acceptance that some animals wouldn't survive no matter what you did. Horse gives us everything, Sardana explains. Meat, milk, leather, hair for rope, bones for tools. In old times, we even used horse intestines for windows. Translucent, lets light in, keeps cold out. She gestures to her actual glass windows, a relatively modern innovation. Glass is better, but breaks. Intestine windows never break, just need replacing every few years. You try to imagine a window made from stretched, scraped horse intestine and decide that glass, despite its fragility, is definitely the superior option. The diet she describes from her childhood is almost entirely animal-based for 8 months of the year. Horse meat was primary, but also reindeer, elk when hunting was successful, and fish, lots of fish. The Saka developed a dish called stroganina, which is raw frozen fish sliced paper-thin and eaten immediately. You catch fish in summer, freeze it whole, keep it all winter. Sardana demonstrates with gestures. When you want to eat, you slice thin, dip in salt, eat frozen. Very good, very fresh. The idea of eating raw frozen fish might seem bizarre, but it's actually brilliant. Freezing preserves the fish perfectly. No refrigeration needed because the entire region is a freezer, and eating it frozen means you don't waste fuel thawing it. The Saka also fermented mare's milk into kumis, a slightly alcoholic, sour drink that provided probiotics and calories during winter. My grandmother made kumis every summer, Sardana says. Strong kumis, good kumis, made you warm inside even in coldest winter. She laughs, a sound like ice cracking. Maybe the alcohol helped with warming too. Housing in traditional times was equally ingenious. The Saka built balagan, hexagonal or octagonal structures with steeply sloped roofs to shed snow, walls made from logs chinked with moss and clay, and a central hearth. But the real innovation was in thermal management. You build the floor below ground level, Sardana explains, maybe 1 meter down. Earth is warmer than air in winter, colder than air in summer. The house stays more even temperature. This is the same principle modern earth-sheltered homes use, though the Saka figured it out centuries ago through trial and error. They also understood air circulation in ways that seem counterintuitive. A small vent near the floor allowed cold air in, while vents near the roof allowed warm air out, creating a convection current that actually helped distribute heat from the central fire more evenly. If you seal house too tight, smoke stays inside, kills you, Sardana says pragmatically. Better cold air coming in than whole family dying from smoke. You ask about medical care in the old days, and Sardana's face grows more serious. Many children died, she says bluntly. Many women died in childbirth. Many men died from hunting accidents, from cold, from bad luck. We had shamans who knew plants, who knew how to set bones, how to treat wounds. Some got better, some didn't. She shows you some of the traditional remedies she still keeps. Yarrow for wounds, a fungus she calls tinder fungus that was used as an antiseptic, various barks and roots whose names you don't recognize. The snowpacking technique for wounds? She nods when you mention it. Very old practice. Before we had anything else, we had snow. Clean snow from the top, never from the ground. Pack it in wound, stops blood, keeps it cold so infection doesn't start so fast. Then you heat a knife in fire until it glows red. Sterilize, you understand? And you cauterize if bleeding won't stop. She mimes pressing a red-hot knife to skin, and you wince. Painful, yes, but alive is better than dead. My brother, he cut his leg very bad when he was young on ice. My mother packed it with snow, then used hot knife. He screamed, I remember, but he lived, kept his leg. The wound healed. Historians still argue whether the Saka's medical knowledge was primarily empirical or if there was any systematic understanding of anatomy and infection. What's clear is that they had a sophisticated triage system, knowing which injuries could be treated, which required drastic measures like amputation or cauterization, and which were simply fatal. If someone got injured far from home in deep winter, sometimes they died, Sardana says. Not because we didn't try, but because trying wasn't enough. The cold would take them, or the injury was too bad, or we were too far from help. You accepted this. You didn't like it, but you accepted it. She tells you about winter travel in the old days, which was done primarily by horse-drawn sleigh or, for longer distances, by reindeer. You never traveled alone, she emphasizes. Always 2 people minimum, better 3 or 4. If one person falls through ice or gets hurt, the others can help. One person alone in winter, dead person. She describes winter storms that could last for days, reducing visibility to 0, where travelers would have to dig into snowbanks and wait it out, their horses standing patiently nearby, covered in snow but protected by their own dense winter coats. Navigation was done by reading the landscape, the shape of snowdrifts, which always formed in consistent patterns based on prevailing winds, the type of vegetation, which indicated what kind of terrain lay beneath the snow, the behavior of animals and birds. Ravens tell you where to find food, Sardana says. They circle where there is dead animal, something to eat. Foxes tell you where mice and lemmings are, which means that area has plants under the snow. You learn to read everything. She mentions a quirky detail that delights you. The Saka traditionally marked trails by piling up frozen horse dung at regular intervals. In summer, you can't see the markers because vegetation grows, she explains. But in winter, the dung piles are visible through snow, and they last for years. Better than wooden markers, which can rot or blow down. You can't decide if this is brilliant or disgusting. Probably both. The seasonal rhythm of life was intense. Summer meant frantic activity. Growing what little you could in gardens, harvesting hay for animals, hunting, fishing, gathering berries and plants, preparing everything for winter. Summer was work, 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 no sleep, Sardana recalls. Because winter was coming, always coming, and if you didn't prepare enough, you died. Simple. Winter was different, cold and dark, but with less urgent work. Winter was for telling stories, for making tools, for repairing things, for surviving and waiting for summer. She talks about clothing construction with the expertise of someone who's sewn thousands of garments. Reindeer hide was preferred for winter clothing because the hair is hollow, providing exceptional insulation. But you must sew it correctly, she demonstrates with her hands, showing how seams should overlap to prevent cold air infiltration. Bad sewing means cold gets in and cold kills. Every woman learned to sew before she learned anything else. The traditional Saka winter outfit included fur-lined boots that went up to the thigh, fur pants, a fur jacket that extended below the knees, fur mittens, and a fur hat with ear flaps. Dressed like this, you could survive even in worst cold. But you still didn't go outside unless you had to. You ask about entertainment, about what people did during the long winter darkness. We sang, Sardana says simply. We told stories. We had epic poems, Alanko, that took days to recite, about heroes and spirits and the creation of the world. We made music with drums and harps. We visited neighbors, shared food, kept each other company. The isolation, she acknowledges, was hard. Some people went a little crazy every winter, especially if they were alone. That's why we made sure no one was completely alone. Always check on your neighbors. Make sure they're alive. Make sure they have food and heat. The spiritual life of the Saka before Soviet times involved shamanism and a complex cosmology of spirits inhabiting the natural world. Every lake has a spirit, every mountain, every old tree, Sardana explains. You respect them, make offerings, ask permission before hunting or fishing. Some people say this is superstition, but I think it's respect. Respect for the land that keeps you alive. Soviet authorities tried to suppress these beliefs, she notes, but they persisted quietly, blending with or hiding behind Orthodox Christianity that had been introduced by Russian colonizers centuries earlier. You ask what she thinks about modern life, the trucks, the diesel generators, the imported goods available in Yakutsk. She considers this carefully. Some things are better now, she admits. Medicine is better. We have antibiotics, hospitals, doctors. Fewer children die. That's good. Communication is better. We can call for help if something is wrong. That's good too. She pauses. But some things are worse. Young people don't learn the old skills anymore. They can't read weather, can't survive on the land without modern tools. If the fuel stops coming, if the trucks stop, many would die. In my time, we could survive with nothing but what we made ourselves. Now, I don't know. It's a common concern among indigenous peoples worldwide, the loss of traditional knowledge as younger generations integrate into globalized culture. The Saka language itself is under pressure, with Russian becoming dominant even in rural areas. My great-grandchildren speak Saka poorly, Sardana says with obvious sadness. They speak Russian mostly like city people. They don't know the old stories, the old songs. When my generation dies, much knowledge dies with us. But she's also pragmatic about change. You can't stop the world from changing, she says. You can only choose what to keep and what to let go. I hope young people keep the important things: respect for the land, taking care of each other, understanding how to survive when things go wrong. The rest. She shrugs. The rest is details. As you're preparing to leave, Sardana gives you a small carved figure made from mammoth ivory. A horse, beautifully detailed despite being no larger than your thumb. Mammoth tusks come out of the permafrost every summer, she explains. They're thousands of years old, from when mammoths lived here. We carve them, sell some to tourists, keep some for ourselves. This is for you to remember. The Saka people are like mammoths. We lived here when it was even colder, when ice covered everything. We survived. Mammoths didn't, but we did. Remember that. You thank her, moved by the gift and the sentiment. Walking back to Nikolai's house through the darkness. It's only 3 p.m., but the sun has already set. You think about resilience and adaptation. The Saka didn't just survive in Yakutia. They thrived, building a rich culture with art and music and epic poetry. Raising families, finding joy even in the darkest winter. They figured out how to keep horses alive at minus 60 degrees Celsius, how to build houses that stayed relatively warm without modern insulation, how to treat wounds with snow and hot knives, how to navigate by reading dung piles and raven flight. That knowledge is fading now, being replaced by diesel fuel and imported food and emergency satellite phones. Maybe that's progress. Maybe it's loss. Probably it's both. But as you huddle in your layers against the minus 70 degrees Celsius night, you can't help but feel that Sardana's generation possessed something profound. A deep, embodied understanding of how to exist in the most extreme environment humans inhabit. And when she dies, whenever that comes, a library of knowledge goes with her. Most of it never written down, never formally documented. just lived and passed along and now slowly fading like footprints in drifting snow. The emergency comes on your 8th day in the village, and it comes the way emergencies always do in Yakutia. Suddenly, brutally, and with the cold as an accomplice. You're helping Nikolai repair a section of roof on the reindeer shelter when you hear shouting from across the village. A man is running, which in minus 68 degrees Celsius while wearing full winter gear is both impressive and alarming, and yelling something you can't understand. Nikolai drops his tools immediately. "Someone is hurt," he says, already moving. "Come." You follow him through the ice fog to a house on the other side of the village, where a small crowd has gathered. Inside, you find chaos. A man in his 40s named Victor is lying on the floor, his right leg bent at an angle that legs should never bend. His snowmobile, one of the few in the village, an ancient machine held together with wire and prayer, sits outside, front end crumpled against a tree. Victor had been traveling between villages to trade goods when he hit a patch of ice hidden under snow, lost control, and crashed. He managed to drive himself back here, but the pain finally overcame him, and he collapsed trying to get into his house. The break is bad. You can see the deformity even through his thick snow pants. His lower leg angles outward unnaturally from just below the knee. Victor is conscious but in shock, his face gray, his breathing shallow and rapid. Mikhail is already there, having arrived from Nikolai's house. He and Nikolai exchange rapid-fire Russian while someone else brings blankets and builds up the fire. You stand uselessly in the corner, your first aid training from a comfortable classroom suddenly feeling laughably inadequate. "Compound fracture," Mikhail says quietly to you in English. "Maybe. We can't tell without cutting pants, and we can't cut pants until we get him warm enough that exposure won't kill him." This is the brutal calculus of emergency medicine in extreme cold. You can't properly assess injuries if doing so will cause worse injuries from cold exposure. Victor is brought closer to the stove, still fully dressed, while someone boils water for hot tea and another person runs to get Sardana, whose 9 decades of experience make her the closest thing to a doctor the village has. Sardana arrives, moving with surprising speed for someone her age, and takes command of the situation with the authority of someone who's dealt with this before. She directs 2 men to carefully cut away Victor's snow pants, working quickly to minimize exposure. The injury is revealed, and it's worse than you feared. The bone hasn't broken through the skin, so not technically compound, thank whatever gods watch over this frozen wasteland, but the fracture is clearly displaced, with the lower leg visibly shortened and rotated compared to the other leg. "We have to set it," Sardana announces. "Now, before swelling gets worse, before muscles contract too much." She looks at Victor. "This will hurt very badly. Do you understand?" He nods, his jaw clenched. Someone produces the inevitable bottle of vodka, and Victor takes 3 long swallows. It's not anesthesia, but it's what they have. What follows is medieval in its brutality and necessity. Sardana instructs Mikhail and Nikolai on positioning. One will hold Victor's thigh stable. The other will pull traction on the lower leg, while she manipulates the fracture back into alignment. You're assigned to hold Victor's shoulders down because he's going to thrash, and they need him as still as possible. "When I say pull," Sardana tells Nikolai, "you pull steady and strong. Don't jerk. Don't stop. Understand? The setting of the fracture is something you'll have nightmares about for years." Victor's screams echo off the wooden walls as Nikolai pulls traction and Sardana manipulates the bones, feeling for alignment through swollen tissue. You're using all your weight to keep Victor's upper body pinned because he's thrashing despite himself, despite knowing this is necessary, despite the vodka. The sounds, grinding bone, Victor's animal howls of pain, are things you wish you could unhear. Sardana works with focused intensity, her gnarled fingers probing, adjusting, feeling. "There," she finally says. "Aligned. Hold him still." The splinting process uses materials at hand. Straight branches that someone runs outside to cut from a tree, strips torn from a sheet for padding and ties, and boards salvaged from an old crate. It's crude but functional. Sardana wraps the splint tight enough to immobilize the leg, but not so tight that it will cut off circulation, though checking circulation in this environment is nearly impossible. Victor's foot is already pale and cold, but that might be from shock from the injury, or from the fact that the room is still below zero despite the roaring fire. "He needs hospital," Sardana announces. "X-rays, proper cast, maybe surgery. But not tonight. Tonight we keep him warm, watch for shock, give him something for pain." She produces a bottle of pills from somewhere. Painkillers, possibly prescribed for someone else years ago, possibly expired, but better than nothing. Victor gets 2 pills with hot tea, and more blankets are piled over him. The discussion then turns to transport. Getting Victor to Yakutsk, 6 hours minimum on dangerous roads, needs to happen, but when? The temperature is minus 68 degrees Celsius. A winter storm is predicted for tomorrow. Victor's condition is serious but stable for now. Mikhail pulls out a satellite phone, one of only 2 in the village, precious and carefully rationed, and makes a call to the hospital in Yakutsk. The connection is terrible, full of static and delays, but he manages to describe the injury. The doctor's advice, as relayed by Mikhail: stabilize, keep warm, watch for compartment syndrome or signs of vascular compromise, and transport when weather permits. Weather permits is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. The storm might last 2 days. It might last a week. Victor might develop complications before it clears. But driving in a full winter storm at these temperatures is suicide. Vehicles freeze, break down, slide off roads, and occupants die before rescue can arrive. Everyone in the room knows this. Everyone has heard stories. The village lost someone 3 years ago trying to make an emergency run to Yakutsk during a storm. They found him 2 days later, frozen in his truck, less than 20 kilometers from the village. You volunteer to sit with Victor through the night, partially to help and partially because you're morbidly curious about how this will play out. His wife, Elena, is there too, holding his hand, her face tight with worry but composed. This is a woman who's lived in Yakutia her whole life. She knows what the odds are, knows what the risks are, and has decided that falling apart isn't helpful. You admire her tremendously for this. The night is long. Victor drifts in and out of consciousness, the painkillers and shock combining to keep him in a gray zone between sleep and waking. You monitor his splinted leg obsessively, checking the toes for color and warmth, watching for swelling that might indicate compartment syndrome, a catastrophic complication where pressure builds up in the leg tissue, cutting off blood flow and killing muscle. If that happens, he could lose the leg or worse. Every hour, you carefully touch his toes, trying to assess temperature through your own cold-numbed fingers. Are they too cold? It's hard to say when everything is cold. Around 3 a.m., Victor's temperature starts to drop despite the blankets and the fire. This is shock progressing, his body failing to maintain homeostasis. Elena recognizes it immediately. Her husband's lips are turning blue, his skin clammy and pale, his shivering decreasing, which paradoxically is a bad sign. When you stop shivering in the cold, it often means your body is giving up on thermoregulation. You and Elena work together to rewarm him actively. More blankets, hot water bottles made from actual bottles filled with warm water and wrapped in cloth, positioned near his groin and armpits where major blood vessels run close to the surface. You make him drink hot tea in small sips, the sugar and warmth helping to raise his core temperature. It takes 2 hours of constant work, but his color improves, his shivering resumes. Good shivering, the body's furnace firing up again, and he becomes more lucid. Am I going to lose the leg? Victor asks you directly at one point, his Russian slow and clear enough that you understand without translation. You don't know how to answer. You're not a doctor. You have no idea if the bone was set correctly, if blood flow is adequate, if infection will set in. But Elena is watching you, and Victor is watching you, and lying seems worse than honesty. I don't know, you tell him, but Sardana has done this before, and you're strong, and we're going to get you to the hospital as soon as the weather clears. It's not much comfort, but it's what you have. The storm arrives right on schedule the next morning, howling out of the northeast with winds that make the entire house shudder. Visibility drops to 0. You can't see the building next door through the whiteout conditions. The temperature, impossibly, drops further, minus 73 degrees Celsius according to Nikolai's thermometer. This is now the coldest temperature you've personally experienced, cold enough that records start getting broken, cold enough that even the locals are shaking their heads in disbelief. Historians still argue whether Yakutia's extreme temperatures are getting worse due to climate change or if they've always been this variable, with modern record-keeping just capturing variations that went undocumented in earlier eras. What's not debatable is that -73 degrees Celsius is life-threateningly cold. If Victor's house lost heat right now, if the stove failed, if they ran out of wood, everyone inside would be dead within hours. The storm lasts 3 days. 3 days of whiteout conditions, of wind that sounds like a living thing trying to tear the walls down, of cold so intense that going outside for any reason is a calculated risk. The village essentially shuts down. Everyone stays inside, burns through there with supplies, and waits. You take shifts with Elena and others from the village, monitoring Victor, keeping him warm, keeping him fed and hydrated, watching that splinted leg like your life depends on it. Victor develops a fever on the second day, 38.5 degrees Celsius. Not catastrophic but concerning. Infection is setting in, maybe from bacteria introduced during the fracture, maybe from the setting procedure, maybe just from bad luck. Sardana administers the village's precious antibiotics. Amoxicillin that's 2 years past its expiration date but stored in permafrost-level cold that's probably kept it viable. The dosing is guesswork based on body weight and vague memories of what worked before. Modern medicine, this is not. The fever breaks on the third day, right as the storm begins to ease. Victor is weak, in pain, but alive and lucid. The leg looks okay. No black tissue indicating gangrene, no massive swelling suggesting compartment syndrome. Good color in the toes when you press on the nail bed and watch it pink up again. You're cautiously optimistic, though you keep that optimism to yourself because you've learned that celebrating too early in Yakutia is asking for disaster. On the fourth day, the storm clears enough for travel. The temperature is still -65 degrees Celsius, but the wind has died and visibility is back. Mikhail and Nikolai prepare one of the more reliable vehicles. A heavy truck with an enclosed bed that they fill with blankets, hot water bottles, food, and extra fuel. Victor is bundled up like a mummy, his splinted leg carefully positioned, and carried to the truck by 4 men working quickly to minimize his exposure to the cold. Elena goes with him, along with Mikhail, who will drive. You watch them leave, the truck's engine roaring as it fights against the cold, and you wonder if they'll make it. 6 hours on icy roads at -65 degrees Celsius in a vehicle that could break down at any moment, carrying a man with a serious fracture and possible infection to a hospital that may or may not be able to save his leg. The odds are better than they were 3 days ago, but they're still not great. 2 days later, Mikhail returns. The news is good. They made it, Victor is in the hospital, the leg is properly casted, and the doctors think he'll keep it, though he'll walk with a limp forever. The doctor said Sardana did a good job, Mikhail reports. The bones were aligned well, better than he expected from field setting. Sardana accepts this with a shrug, as if setting compound fractures in -70 degrees Celsius is just something anyone would know how to do. You think about what would have happened if Victor had crashed somewhere more remote, between villages instead of near one, if the fracture had been worse, if the storm had lasted longer, if the vehicle had broken down during the transport. Any of these variables changing slightly could have meant death or amputation. This is what living in Yakutia means. Navigating an endless series of potentially fatal scenarios, making the best decisions you can with inadequate resources, and hoping that luck favors you. That night, you lie awake thinking about fragility. How thin the margin is between survival and disaster in this place. How dependent everyone is on a complex web of skills, resources, and mutual aid. Victor survived because Sardana knew how to set bones, because the village had a working vehicle and fuel, because Mikhail was willing to drive through post-storm conditions, because luck held and nothing else went catastrophically wrong. Remove any one of those factors, and you're carving a new memorial along the ice road. The cold doesn't care about your preparedness or your skill. It's patient and relentless and waiting for you to make a mistake. And eventually, everyone does. By your 3rd week in Yakutia, you start to notice changes in yourself that have nothing to do with physical adaptation to the cold. Your sleep is wrong, fractured and strange, full of vivid dreams that blur into waking moments until you're not entirely sure what's real. You find yourself staring at the wall for long periods, thinking about nothing in particular, your mind just empty. The darkness is getting to you, working its way into your brain chemistry like cold seeping through inadequate clothing. The sun, when it bothers to appear at all, drags itself above the horizon for maybe 3 hours now. And even then it's a pale, sickly thing that provides light but no warmth, no comfort. The rest of the time, 21 hours out of every 24, is darkness or that eerie blue twilight that's somehow worse than full dark because it tricks your brain into expecting dawn that never comes. Your circadian rhythm, that ancient biological clock calibrated to the cycle of day and night, is completely confused. Your body doesn't know when to produce melatonin, when to wake up, when to feel alert. You're tired all the time but can't sleep properly. Hungry but have no appetite, cold despite layers of clothing and proximity to the fire. This is what isolation and darkness do to the human brain, and you're experiencing it in real time. Nikolai notices your 1,000-yard stare one morning and grunts knowingly. Winter darkness sickness, he says, using a phrase that Mikhail translates as something between seasonal affective disorder and cabin fever. Everyone gets it a little. Some people get it a lot. You have to fight it, or it eats you. The science behind this is well documented, even if experiencing it feels uniquely personal and terrible. Lack of sunlight disrupts your production of serotonin and dopamine, neurotransmitters that regulate mood, motivation, and the sense that life is worth living. Your melatonin production goes haywire, produced at odd times because your brain can't distinguish between night and day when it's dark almost constantly. Vitamin D levels plummet without sunlight exposure, which affects everything from bone health to immune function to mental well-being. Your brain is literally being starved of the environmental inputs it needs to function normally. Depression rates in the Arctic regions are significantly higher than in temperate zones, and suicide rates in indigenous Arctic communities are among the highest in the world. Some of this is due to social factors, poverty, cultural disruption, substance abuse, but some of it is simply the grinding psychological toll of months-long darkness combined with isolation and extreme cold. Your brain wasn't designed for this. Nobody's brain was designed for this. You notice it in others too. Conversations in the village have become shorter, more perfunctory. People move slowly, mechanically, going through the motions of daily survival without enthusiasm. The children are quieter than when you first arrived, less playful, their energy dimmed. Even Olga, usually cheerful and bustling, sits for long periods staring into the fire with an expression of profound weariness. The isolation compounds everything. The village has maybe 40 people total. You see the same faces every day, have the same conversations, exist in a social bubble that's claustrophobic despite the vast empty landscape surrounding you. There's no escape, no variety, no stimulation beyond what you can generate internally. The internet, when the generator runs and the connection works, is painfully slow and unreliable. A tease of connection to the outside world that mostly serves to remind you how cut off you are. Sensory deprivation is another factor. In the cold, you're bundled up constantly, your sense of touch muffled through layers. The landscape is monochrome: white snow, gray sky, black trees. There are no colors, no variety, just endless white and gray and black. Sounds are muffled by snow and the thick walls of houses. Even smells are reduced in extreme cold. Your nose barely works when it's frozen, and the cold suppresses odors anyway. Your brain is being deprived of the sensory richness it craves, and it's not handling it well. You start to understand why the Saka people developed their elaborate oral traditions, their epic poems and songs. Entertainment isn't frivolous here, it's psychological survival equipment. Storytelling, music, any kind of mental stimulation helps fight off the crushing monotony and darkness. Sardana's stories about heroes and spirits aren't just cultural heritage. They're medicine for the mind, something to think about besides the cold and the dark and the slow passage of time. Nikolai tries to help by teaching you traditional crafts, carving wood, working with leather, repairing tools. Keep your hands busy, keep your mind busy, he advises. Don't let yourself just sit and think too much. Thinking too much in winter is dangerous. There's folk wisdom in this that aligns with modern understanding of depression. Rumination, getting stuck in negative thought loops, is one of the core features of depressive episodes. Staying engaged in tasks, even simple ones, helps disrupt those loops. But some days, even that doesn't help. You have a particularly bad day about 3 weeks in, where you wake up feeling like there's a weight on your chest, like breathing requires conscious effort. The thought of going outside to help with chores seems impossible, overwhelming. You lie under your reindeer hides, staring at the wooden beams of the ceiling, and understand viscerally how people give up, how they stop fighting, how the cold and the dark and the isolation combine into a force that's too heavy to resist. Mikhail finds you like this and sits down next to your sleeping platform. "Tell me," he says simply, and you do. You talk about feeling disconnected, about the numbness that's settled over everything, about how nothing seems to matter and you can't remember why you wanted to come here in the first place. He listens without interrupting, and when you're done, he nods. "This happened to me," he says. 10 years ago, bad winter, I lost my wife to cancer in October. Had to face the whole winter alone for the first time. I didn't think I would make it to spring." He's quiet for a moment. "But I did. You know how? I decided I would survive one day at a time. Not the whole winter, just today. Can you survive today? Yes? Good. Tomorrow you ask again. Can you survive today? And you keep doing that until spring comes. It's not profound advice, but it's practical and somehow it helps. One day at a time. You can manage that. You get up, get dressed, force yourself to help with the morning chores. The movement helps. The tasks help. By evening, you feel marginally more human. But you also start to notice the coping mechanisms people use, and not all of them are healthy. Alcohol is everywhere, vodka mostly, but also homemade fermented drinks. People drink to warm up, they say, but you see how some of them drink to escape, to numb the psychological pain of winter. There's a man named Boris in the village who's drunk more often than not. His face permanently flushed, his hands shaking. Alcoholism in Arctic communities is a well-documented problem, and you're seeing it firsthand. Historians still argue whether alcoholism in indigenous Arctic populations was introduced by European contact or if fermented drinks were part of traditional culture. What's clear is that modern rates of alcohol abuse in these communities are catastrophic, driven by a combination of historical trauma, poverty, lack of opportunity, and the grinding psychological toll of Arctic winters. Alcohol provides temporary relief from depression and boredom, but it exacerbates both in the long run, creating a vicious cycle that destroys individuals and families. You also see domestic violence simmering under the surface. Raised voices from houses at night, a woman with a black eye who claims she fell, a child who flinches when adults move too quickly. The isolation means there's nowhere to escape abusive situations. No shelters, no easy way to leave. Social workers and police are in Yakutsk, hours away. The village handles these situations internally, which sometimes works and sometimes just means abuse continues unchecked. The psychological dynamics of small, isolated communities are complex. On one hand, there's mutual support and interdependence. People help each other because they must. On the other hand, there's no privacy, no escape from conflicts or problematic relationships, and social pressure to conform can be oppressive. Grudges last forever when you see the same people every day for decades. Scandals never die. Everyone knows everyone's business, which can be comforting or suffocating depending on the situation. You witness a community meeting one evening where a dispute over firewood allocation nearly turns violent. Two men are shouting at each other, accusations flying, and it's clear this isn't really about firewood. It's about old grievances, about slights from years ago, about the pressure cooker environment of winter isolation bringing everything to a boil. Nikolai and several elders intervene, calming things down, negotiating a compromise. But the tension remains, simmering. The children's mental health concerns you particularly. They're growing up in this environment, experiencing these long winters every year of their lives. Some seem resilient, adapting naturally, but others show signs of what psychologists call failure to thrive. Withdrawn, quiet, not playing as vigorously as children should. The school, when it operates, provides some structure and social interaction, but it's sporadic. The teacher lives in Yakutsk and can only visit when weather permits, so education happens in irregular bursts. You talk to one of the mothers about this, a woman named Katia whose two daughters are 7 and 9. I worry about them, she admits. They don't smile as much in winter. They get sad, quiet. I try to keep them active, give them things to do, but it's hard. There's only so much you can do in a small house during winter. She's considering moving to Yakutsk, where there are schools and activities and more children for her daughters to interact with. But in the city, we lose connection to our culture, to the old ways. How do I choose between their mental health now and their cultural identity? It's an impossible question, one that indigenous communities worldwide struggle with. Do you stay in traditional lands and accept the hardships? Or do you migrate to cities where opportunities are better but cultural identity often gets lost? There's no good answer, just trade-offs and compromises. You also notice the sound, or rather, the absence of it. The silence in Yakutia is profound, especially during winter. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, no distant traffic noise, nothing but wind and the occasional crack of freezing trees. This silence is unsettling in a way that's hard to articulate. Humans evolved in environments full of ambient noise. Animal sounds, water, wind and leaves, other humans. Complete silence is alien, disturbing. Your brain keeps waiting for sounds that never come, and the lack of auditory stimulation adds to the general sensory deprivation. When the wind picks up, it's almost a relief. At least it's something to hear, even if the sound is eerie and relentless. The Saka have multiple words for different types of wind, reflecting their importance in Arctic life. There's the dry, brutal wind from the north that brings the coldest temperatures. The wet wind from the south that sometimes brings brief warming and snow. The swirling wind that creates whiteout conditions. Each type means different things for safety and survival. You experience what the locals call Muse Ustra one night, a phenomenon where extreme cold causes the moisture in your breath to freeze instantly into ice fog around your face, creating a personal cloud that glows in moonlight. It's beautiful and terrifying, a visible reminder that you're exhaling at 37 degrees Celsius into air that's minus 71 degrees Celsius, and the temperature difference is so extreme that physical phase changes happen in real time. You're literally watching your breath solidify. The psychological impact of living under constant threat becomes clear. Every moment outside is potentially dangerous. Every vehicle trip could end in mechanical failure and death. Every injury could become life-threatening due to distance from medical care. This constant low-level stress wears on the psyche, creating a baseline anxiety that never fully goes away. You find yourself checking and rechecking your clothing before going outside, triple-checking that the door is closed, obsessively monitoring the fire and fuel supplies. These aren't neurotic behaviors, they're appropriate responses to genuine danger, but they're exhausting. Sleep disturbances get worse as the weeks pass. You have nightmares about being locked outside, about the fire going out, about getting lost in whiteout conditions. You wake up in panic, heart racing, convinced something is wrong until you register the familiar sounds of the house. The stove crackling, someone snoring, the wind outside. These nightmares are common, Mikhail tells you. Everyone has them. They're your brain processing the legitimate fears that you can't afford to consciously dwell on during the day. There's also the strange phenomenon of time distortion. Days blend together in the darkness. You lose track of what day it is, whether it's been 2 days or 4 since something happened. The lack of routine, irregular sleep, meals at odd times, no consistent schedule, means there are no temporal anchors. Time becomes fluid, stretchy, weird. This is disorienting in a profound way. Humans need temporal structure to maintain psychological stability, and without it, you drift. By the end of your 4th week, you understand that the cold isn't the only threat in Yakutia. Maybe it's not even the primary threat for people who know how to dress for it. The real danger is psychological. The slow erosion of mental health under the combined assault of darkness, isolation, sensory deprivation, and unrelenting stress. The cold can kill you in hours. The darkness can kill you over months, wearing away at your will to continue until one day you just stop trying. And spring is still months away. Yakutsk is a city that shouldn't exist. You arrive there on your 5th week, having caught a ride with a supply truck that's making the run from the village. The transition from tiny settlement to urban center of 300,000 people is jarring, like stepping through a portal into a different reality. Buildings rise 5, 10, 15 stories into the frozen air, all of them perched on stilts like enormous birds trying to keep their feet out of cold water. Smoke and steam rise from hundreds of chimneys and vents, creating a permanent haze over the city. The temperature is minus 63 degrees Celsius, practically balmy compared to the village, and yet here are people living something resembling modern life. The first thing that strikes you is the sheer audacity of it. Someone looked at the coldest permanently inhabited region on Earth, where the ground is frozen solid to depths of 1,500 meters, where winter lasts 8 months, where temperatures regularly drop below minus 60 degrees Celsius, and thought, yes, this is a great place to build a major city. The fact that they succeeded is testament to human stubbornness, Soviet industrial ambition, and the discovery of diamonds in the 1950s that made Yakutia suddenly very economically interesting to Moscow. The permafrost creates unique engineering challenges that you see everywhere. Every building, as in the village, sits on concrete or metal piles driven deep into the frozen earth. But in a city, this creates a bizarre landscape. Massive apartment blocks balanced on forests of pylons, with parking, storage, and empty air underneath. Some buildings have enclosed ground floors where the gap has been filled in, but these require constant monitoring because the building's heat can melt the permafrost beneath, causing subsidence and structural failure. You're staying with a friend of Mikhail's named Dmitry, a mining engineer who works for one of the diamond companies. His apartment is on the 8th floor of a Soviet-era block, reached by an elevator that works intermittently and a stairwell that's so cold you can see your breath. The apartment itself is overheated, maybe 25 degrees Celsius, which feels tropical after weeks in houses that struggle to stay above freezing. Dmitry explains that district heating is run aggressively hot because heat loss through old Soviet-era insulation is massive, and nobody wants pipes freezing inside the walls. "Welcome to civilization," Dmitry says with a grin, gesturing around his cramped 2-room apartment. He's being ironic, but also not. There's running water here, heated and delivered through an elaborate system of insulated pipes that's constantly maintained and repaired. There's electricity that runs reliably most of the time. There's internet, though it's expensive and sometimes slow. There's a supermarket within walking distance, though walking distance in minus 63 degrees Celsius means maybe 3 blocks maximum before frostbite becomes a serious concern. The logistics of running a modern city in these conditions are staggering. Water and heating pipes can't be buried underground. They'd freeze, or worse, their heat would melt the permafrost and they'd sink and break. Instead, they run above ground in massive insulated conduits called utilidors that you see everywhere. These huge pipes supported on metal frames, wrapped in layer after layer of insulation, and sometimes actively heated to prevent freezing. The utilidors dominate the urban landscape, creating a maze of overhead infrastructure that you have to duck under or walk around. When pipes do break, and they break often in these conditions, it's an emergency. Water spewing from a ruptured pipe freezes almost instantly, creating massive ice sculptures and cutting off heating and water to entire blocks. You witness one such failure on your second day. A geyser of water shooting into the air from a broken heating main, instantly turning to steam and ice crystals, creating a fog bank that shuts down traffic for blocks. Crews in heated suits work frantically to isolate the break and drain the system while residents shiver in apartments that are rapidly cooling. Transportation in Yakutsk is its own special hell. Personal vehicles, as you learned in the village, must be kept running or equipped with heating systems to prevent the engine from freezing. The city solves this with heated parking structures and plug-in engine heaters that residents use religiously. But public transportation, buses primarily, run continuously on their routes, never stopping their engines, burning fuel 24/7 through the winter. The economic and environmental cost is enormous, but the alternative is a transportation system that doesn't work. You take a bus one morning, an experience that's surreal. The bus interior is overheated to compensate for cold blasting in every time the doors open. The windows are triple-paned and still frosted over completely on the inside, making it impossible to see where you are. The driver navigates by memory and landmarks only he can recognize through the fog. Passengers board looking like astronauts in their extreme cold gear, immediately begin stripping layers in the overheated interior, and then bundle back up before disembarking. It's exhausting. The city has supermarkets that would look familiar anywhere in Russia, aisles of packaged goods, produce sections, meat counters. But the logistics behind stocking these stores are nightmarish. Everything must be trucked in, either from railway terminals thousands of kilometers away or flown in, both phenomenally expensive options. Fresh produce is rare and costs approximately what you'd pay for luxury items elsewhere. A kilogram of oranges might cost 500 rubles, about $5 US. A small fortune for a region where average income is low despite diamond wealth. The diamonds are why Yakutsk exists as more than a regional outpost. The Yakutia region produces about 25% of the world's gem-quality diamonds, extracted from massive open-pit mines in the permafrost. Dmitry works at one such mine, a place called Udakny about 500 kilometers northwest of Yakutsk. We dig in frozen ground year-round, he explains. Have to use explosives to break up the permafrost before we can excavate. The ore is frozen solid, has to be processed immediately or it freezes into unbreakable chunks. The mines operate in shifts through the winter, workers enduring minus 70 degrees Celsius temperatures to extract diamonds that will eventually sit in engagement rings in places where people complain if the air conditioning is set too high. Dmitry describes working conditions that sound medieval. Heated brake shacks scattered around the mine site where workers retreat every 20 to 30 minutes to avoid frostbite. Machinery that breaks constantly because metal becomes brittle in extreme cold. Accidents that happen when people make small mistakes that would be trivial in normal conditions but are fatal here. 2 years ago, a man's parka zipper broke while he was working. Dmitry tells you. Just failed, the metal too cold, too brittle. Cold got inside his clothing before he could get to a shelter. By the time co-workers got him to medical, he had severe frostbite on his torso. Lost both nipples, part of his abdominal skin. They say he'll never work outside again. This is delivered matter-of-factly, a workplace hazard story like someone elsewhere might tell about a colleague who threw out their back lifting boxes. The economic equation of Yakutsk is bizarre. Diamond mining generates enormous revenue, but most of it flows to Moscow and international mining corporations. The region itself sees some benefit, jobs, infrastructure investment, regional development, but poverty remains widespread. You see it in the older neighborhoods. Dilapidated Soviet-era housing, inadequate heating, people living in conditions only marginally better than the rural villages. Historians still argue whether Yakutia is better or worse off under Russian control than it would be as an independent nation, though this debate is mostly academic since independence isn't politically feasible. What's clear is that the region's resources have been extracted for others' benefit for centuries. First furs under the Russian Empire, then gold under the Soviets, now diamonds under the current regime. The Saka people themselves have limited control over their land's wealth. The city has adapted in creative ways to extreme cold. There are underground shopping complexes where you can go from building to building without going outside. The central market is entirely enclosed and heated, a massive structure where vendors sell everything from reindeer meat to imported electronics. Schools and kindergartens are built with connecting tunnels so children don't have to go outside during the worst cold. Office buildings have elaborate entryway systems, multiple doors creating airlocks to prevent heat loss. Social life in Yakutsk is weirdly vibrant despite the conditions. There are restaurants, clubs, movie theaters, all the amenities of urban life. People dress up and go out, braving minus 65 degrees Celsius to meet friends at a bar or see a film. You witness this one evening, watching people emerge from apartment buildings in designer coats over their insulated survival gear, heading out for a night on the town. It's defiant in a way you can't help but admire, refusing to let the cold dictate the terms of existence, insisting on living rather than merely surviving. But the cold is always there, always waiting. You hear stories constantly. A teenager who died after getting drunk at a party and trying to walk home, passing out in a snowbank and freezing before anyone found him. A woman who had a stroke on the street, collapsed, and froze to death before an ambulance could reach her in traffic. An elderly man whose apartment heating failed at night, found frozen in his bed the next morning. The cold is the permanent backdrop to every decision, every plan, every moment of life. The permafrost is also becoming a problem in new ways. climate change is causing it to thaw in spots, creating sinkholes and causing buildings to sink and crack. Entire neighborhoods are threatened by subsidence as the ground beneath them destabilizes. You see buildings with massive cracks in their walls, tilting at angles, still occupied because people have nowhere else to go. The city government tries to address this with reinforcement and repairs, but the scale of the problem is overwhelming. Dmitry takes you to see one particularly dramatic failure: a 5-story apartment block that's tilting so severely it looks like it might topple over. The bottom floors have been evacuated, but people still live in the upper apartments because the housing shortage is so severe they have no alternative. They'll live there until it collapses, Dmitry says with a shrug. Then the government will have to relocate them. Until then, cheap rent. The city has infrastructure that seems bizarrely out of place. A McDonald's, adapted menu featuring horse meat burgers, a shopping mall with Western brands, cell phone stores selling the latest smartphones that barely function in the cold. There's a university teaching everything from engineering to linguistics. There are museums, theaters, cultural centers. Modern life has been imposed on this impossible environment through sheer determination and massive resource expenditure. You visit a school one day, curious about how education works here. The building is overheated like everywhere else. Children in light clothing running through hallways that would be perfectly comfortable in Moscow. But there are special rules. Outdoor recess is canceled when temperatures drop below -45 degrees Celsius. At temperatures below -52 degrees Celsius, elementary school is canceled. Below -56 degrees Celsius, middle and high school are canceled. These thresholds exist because children waiting for buses or walking to school have died from exposure. The teachers you meet are a mix of locals who grew up here and outsiders who came for jobs and adventure. One teacher from St. Petersburg admits she's counting the days until her contract ends and she can leave. "I've been here 3 years," she says. "I thought I could handle it, thought it would be an adventure. But the winters, they just grind you down. The darkness, the cold, the isolation. I'm going back to civilization as soon as I can." But others love it. A soccer teacher named Adalina tells you she wouldn't live anywhere else. "This is my home," she says simply. Yes, it's hard, but it's beautiful too. The winter light, the way snow sparkles, the northern lights, you don't get that in Moscow. And the community, the culture, the connection to the land. I could earn more money in the city, have an easier life, but I'd lose myself. You visit the Mammoth Museum, a quirky institution dedicated to the prehistoric elephants that once roamed Yakutia and whose remains still emerge from melting permafrost. There are remarkably well-preserved specimens, tusks, bones, even frozen tissue samples. Climate change is accelerating discoveries as permafrost thaws, revealing animals that died 10,000 to 40,000 years ago. Some scientists think we might eventually find intact mammoth DNA suitable for cloning, though others argue this is science fiction. The museum guide tells you about a discovery last year: a perfectly preserved mammoth calf found by reindeer herders, its fur still intact, its trunk still flexible. It was frozen so well we could see its last meal in its stomach, the guide says with enthusiasm. Grass and flowers from 30,000 years ago. You're struck by the timeline. This mammoth died before human civilization existed as we understand it, was frozen instantly in mud or ice, and stayed frozen for 300 centuries until climate change thawed it out. The local market is an assault on the senses. Vendors selling frozen fish so hard you could use them as weapons. Reindeer carcasses hanging like sculptures, stalls with traditional crafts next to stalls selling cheap Chinese electronics. The food section includes things you've never seen. Frozen horse milk in blocks that you shave into tea, fermented fish paste that smells aggressive even when frozen, whole reindeer heads for soup. You buy some stroganina, frozen fish sliced thin, from a vendor and eat it right there in the market, dipping it in salt as tradition demands. It's strange but not unpleasant. The fish sweet and delicate. The frozen texture like sashimi that's been in the freezer too long. The vendor, an old woman bundled in so many layers you can barely see her face, nods approvingly. Good, yes? Fresh fish, frozen perfect, very healthy. One evening, Dmitry takes you to a banya, a Russian sauna. The experience of going from minus 60 degrees Celsius outside to plus 90 degrees Celsius inside is so extreme your body doesn't know how to process it. You sit on wooden benches with naked strangers, all of you sweating profusely, occasionally pouring water over hot rocks to create steam, then running outside to roll in the snow before going back in. It's ritualistic, ancient, and apparently healthy according to locals who swear it boosts circulation and immunity. This is how we survive winter, Dmitry explains between sauna rounds. We create extreme contrasts. Very hot, very cold, very hot again. Shocks the system, reminds the body it's alive. Whether there's scientific basis for this or it's folk medicine is unclear, but everyone does it and people seem healthier for it. You spend 2 weeks in Yakutsk and by the end you're experiencing a strange cognitive dissonance. This is simultaneously a functioning modern city with all the expected amenities and the most hostile urban environment you can imagine. People here are living normal lives, going to work, raising children, pursuing hobbies, falling in love, getting divorced, starting businesses, retiring, all while existing in conditions that would trigger emergency declarations anywhere else. The stubborn normalcy of it all is what strikes you most. A place that by all reasonable measures should be uninhabitable is home to 300,000 people who've simply decided that minus 60 degrees Celsius is manageable and have built an entire urban civilization around that decision. It's audacious and absurd and somehow inspiring. Humans really will live anywhere, survive anything, if they're determined enough or desperate enough or simply have nowhere else to go. You're sitting in Dmitry's overheated apartment on your last evening in Yakutsk, staring out the triple-paned window at the ice fog glowing under streetlights, and you ask the question that's been building for weeks, why do people stay here? Dmitry takes a long pull from his beer. Expensive, imported from somewhere that doesn't require heroic logistics, and considers this carefully. That's the question everyone from outside asks, he says finally, and there's no single answer. For some people, it's money. The mines pay well, better than most jobs elsewhere in Russia. For others, it's home. They were born here, their families are here, their language and culture are here. For some, it's stubbornness, not wanting to let the cold win. He pauses. And for some of us, there's something about this place that gets into you. The extremity of it, the rawness. Life here is more real somehow. You can't take anything for granted. You can't coast through on autopilot. Every day, you're consciously choosing to survive. This idea of choosing to survive, of the cold stripping away the comfortable illusions that cushion existence in easier climates, resonates with your own experience over the past weeks. You've never felt more present, more aware of your own mortality and fragility than you have in Yakutia. When stepping outside can kill you in minutes, when getting from point A to point B requires careful planning and proper equipment, when your survival depends on competence and community, existence takes on an intensity that's both exhausting and weirdly addictive. The economic reality is complex. Diamond mining employs thousands directly and thousands more indirectly, creating a regional economy that, while not prosperous by global standards, provides livable incomes for many. The average monthly salary in Yakutsk is around 60,000 to 80,000 rubles, roughly $650 to $850 USD, higher than many Russian regions but barely adequate given the cost of living in such an extreme environment. Everything is more expensive here: food, fuel, clothing, housing, because transportation costs are built into every price. But many people stay despite economic hardship, not because of economic opportunity. Adalina, the teacher you met, could earn significantly more in Moscow or St. Petersburg, but she stays because Yakutsk is where Sakha language and culture are most alive. In Russian cities, I'm just another minority person, an exotic curiosity, she told you. Here, I'm Sakha, among my people, speaking my language, practicing my culture. That's worth more than money. The Sakha language itself is under threat despite being spoken by roughly 500,000 people. Russian dominates education, government, media, and commerce. Young people increasingly grow up bilingual but Russian dominant, their Sakha becoming a home language, a grandparent language, eventually a lost language. This is the pattern worldwide with indigenous languages, and Yakutia is not exempt despite the Sakha being the majority population in their own republic. There's also the matter of diamond wealth creating perverse incentives. The region produces billions of dollars in diamonds annually, yet poverty remains widespread. The wealth flows upward to corporations and the federal government in Moscow, while local infrastructure crumbles and services remain inadequate. Historians still argue whether resource extraction in Yakutia represents development or exploitation, but walking through the poorer neighborhoods of Yakutsk, seeing buildings literally falling apart while diamond revenue enriches distant shareholders, the answer seems clear. Yet people adapt with remarkable creativity. You've seen entrepreneurs running businesses from heated shipping containers, restaurants operating out of modified buses, markets thriving in conditions that would shut down commerce anywhere else. There's a resilience and ingenuity that's necessary for survival but also becomes cultural identity, the pride of being able to function when others would fail. The climate is changing, and everyone knows it. Winters are slightly warmer on average than they were 50 years ago, though warmer is relative. We're talking minus 65 degrees Celsius instead of minus 68 degrees Celsius. More significantly, the permafrost is thawing in unpredictable patches, creating sinkholes, destabilizing buildings, releasing methane from organic matter that's been frozen for millennia. Some scientists warn that Yakutian permafrost contains massive amounts of carbon that, if released through thawing, could accelerate global warming dramatically. We're living on a time bomb, Dmitry says when you ask about this. Not just the buildings sinking, though that's bad enough. The whole ecosystem is changing. Animals are migrating differently. Plants are appearing that never grew here before. Ice roads that we rely on for winter transport are becoming unreliable because the ice forms later and melts earlier. He gestures vaguely northward. Some of the indigenous communities farther north, they're completely cut off now for parts of the year because the ice roads don't freeze properly and there are no regular roads. Climate change is killing their way of life faster than anything else ever has. The indigenous peoples in Yakutia's more remote areas, the Evenks, the Evens, the Yukagir, number in the thousands rather than hundreds of thousands, and their traditional reindeer herding lifestyles are increasingly untenable. Reindeer need specific lichens that grow in specific conditions. As climate changes, those lichens are disappearing from traditional grazing areas, forcing herders to travel farther or abandon the lifestyle entirely. Some villages are being relocated because permafrost thaw has made their locations uninhabitable. This is climate change in real time, destroying cultures that have existed for thousands of years. But there's also defiant optimism. You meet a young couple, Alexei and Sina, who just had a baby. A tiny girl named Kunai, swaddled in layers of blankets, her face barely visible. They're raising her in Yakutsk deliberately, wanting her to grow up Saka, to speak the language, to know the culture. People say we're crazy to raise a child here, Sina tells you. But our ancestors raised children here for thousands of years in much harder conditions. We have hospitals now, heated apartments, grocery stores. We're fine. Kunai represents something important, the future tense of Yakutia. Despite everything, the cold, the darkness, the isolation, the economic challenges, the climate change, people are still choosing to build lives here, still having children, still investing in a future in this place. It's not optimism exactly, more like determination, a refusal to abandon home despite reasonable arguments for leaving. The beauty of the place is undeniable once you adjust to a different aesthetic. The winter light has a quality you've never seen elsewhere, low angle, crystalline, refracting through ice fog into pillars and halos. When the northern lights appear, which they do frequently this far north, they transform the sky into something alien and magnificent, green and purple curtains rippling across the stars. You've stood outside at minus 68 degrees Celsius, risking frostbite just to watch them, understanding how ancient people saw gods and spirits in these lights. The landscape itself, when you can see it through the ice fog and darkness, is stark and beautiful. Endless taiga forest, the larch trees black against white snow, stretching to horizons so distant they blur into myth. Rivers frozen into highways of ice. Mountains in the distance, sharp and white and impossibly remote. There's a purity to it, an extremity that strips away everything but essential truth. You are small, the world is vast and harsh, and survival is never guaranteed. On your final day, you make one more trip back to Nikolai's village to say goodbye. The drive takes 7 hours through worsening weather, and you arrive to find the temperature at minus 74 degrees Celsius, the coldest you've experienced. It's so cold that your eyelashes freeze together when you blink, so cold that breathing through your nose risks frostbite inside your nasal passages, so cold that the air itself seems to have weight and resistance. But inside Nikolai's house, it's warm. The stove is roaring, Olga is cooking, Sasha is there with his arm healed, though scarred, and Victor has returned from the hospital, his leg in a cast but mending. There's a small celebration, your departure, Victor's survival, Sasha's recovery, just life continuing despite everything. They've prepared a feast by local standards. Reindeer stroganina, horse meat stew, fermented mare's milk, bread, and tea. Everyone is there, Sardana, Mikhail, families you've come to know. Sardana gives a toast, her voice strong despite her age, to survival, to community, to stubbornness in the face of impossible conditions. To our guest, who came to learn how we live at minus 71 degrees Celsius and didn't die. Everyone laughs, drinks, and the warmth in the room has nothing to do with the stove. You think about what you've learned. That snow can be medicine when nothing else is available. That humans can adapt to almost anything if they must. That community is survival equipment in environments too harsh for individuals to face alone. That psychological resilience matters as much as physical preparation. That indigenous knowledge accumulated over millennia contains wisdom modern science is only beginning to appreciate. That climate change isn't an abstract future threat, but a present reality destroying ways of life right now. That home is where you choose to make it, even if that choice seems insane to everyone else. You understand now why people stay. It's not one reason but a constellation of reasons, different for everyone but adding up to the same conclusion. This place, for all its hostility, is home. The cold that tries to kill you also defines you. The darkness that crushes your spirit also makes you appreciate light. The isolation that drives you mad also creates bonds of community that can't exist in easier places. The harsh environment that threatens daily survival also strips away pretense and reveals what really matters. Yakutia is the land of extremes, and living here means becoming extreme yourself. Extremely resilient, extremely community-oriented, extremely present in each moment because any moment could be your last. It's not a life for everyone. Maybe it's not a life for most people. But for those who choose it, or for whom it's been chosen by birth and circumstance, it's a life of profound meaning and undeniable reality. As you prepare to leave the next morning, heading back to Yakutsk, then flying out to Moscow and eventually home, Nikolai stops you at the door. He hands you something wrapped in cloth. For remembering, he says. You unwrap it. A small knife in a reindeer hide sheath, beautifully made, the blade sharp and true. My grandfather made this, Nikolai explains. Used it for 70 years. I want you to have it, to remember that survival is an art, passed down through generations. And to remember us, the people who live where the thermometer breaks. You thank him, genuinely moved. The knife is more than a gift. It's a symbol of everything you've learned, everything this place represents. As the truck pulls away, heading toward the ice road that leads to Yakutsk, you watch the village disappear into the ice fog, smoke rising from chimneys into the minus 74 degrees Celsius air. Life continuing in the coldest inhabited place on Earth. The magnetism Dmitri described, you feel it now. Part of you wants to stay, to test yourself against this environment, to become part of this improbable community. But another part knows you're not equipped for this life, not tough enough or skilled enough or perhaps not stubborn enough. This is not your home, will never be your home, though it's changed you in ways you're still processing. The people of Yakutia, Sakha, Russian, and other indigenous groups have achieved something remarkable. They've created thriving communities in conditions that should be uninhabitable. They've raised children, made art, told stories, fallen in love, and built lives in a place that tests human limits every single day. They pack wounds with snow because there's nothing else. And they survive not through superhuman abilities, but through accumulated knowledge, community support, and relentless determination. And tomorrow, when temperatures drop to minus 75 degrees Celsius or minus 80 degrees Celsius or whatever impossible number comes next, they'll wake up, feed their stoves, check on their neighbors, and continue the ancient dance of survival that defines existence in the coldest place humans call home. The wind picks up outside, a familiar sound now, that particular howl of Yakutian winter. You close your eyes, letting the warmth of the stove and the weight of the reindeer hides settle over you. Your breathing slows, deepens, finding a rhythm that matches the crackle of burning wood. The cold is out there, patient and eternal, but in here, in this moment, you're warm and safe and alive. You think about all the people sleeping in Yakutia tonight, in Yakutsk's tilting apartment buildings, in tiny villages scattered across the taiga, in mining camps and lonely outposts, all of them choosing, consciously or by circumstance, to stay in this impossible place. Their resilience is its own kind of poetry, their stubborn survival a testament to human adaptability and will. The fire crackles lower, your thoughts grow softer, and somewhere between waking and sleeping, you understand finally what it means to survive at minus 71 degrees Celsius. It means accepting that comfort is temporary, safety is conditional, and tomorrow is never guaranteed. It means finding beauty in harsh light and community in isolation. It means making peace with the cold, respecting it, fearing it, but never letting it dictate whether you give up or carry on. The darkness outside is absolute now, the kind of darkness only a Yakutian winter can produce. But inside there's warmth, there's breath, there's life continuing despite everything. And that's enough. For tonight, that's more than enough. Let the cold keep its vigil outside. Let the stars will overhead in their ancient patterns. Let the northern lights dance if they feel like dancing. In here, you're drifting now, warm and safe, carrying stories of survival that people have been telling for thousands of years, stories that will be told for thousands more. Sleep comes gently, finally, wrapping around you like reindeer hide, like accumulated wisdom, like the embrace of a harsh land that somehow, impossibly, feels like home.